The day I spent $80,000 on my daughter's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day my heart shattered into a million pieces. I remember standing there in the Grand Overlook Hotel, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and flower arrangements that cost more than my first car. The venue overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, waves crashing against the Newport cliffs. A perfect backdrop for what should have been a perfect day. But perfection, as I've learned, comes at a price far greater than dollars. My name is Margaret Wilson. For 25 years, I taught English at Westfield Academy while raising my daughter Olivia alone. 25 years of grading papers until midnight, of skipping lunch to save a few dollars, of watching other teachers go on European vacations while I worked summer school. 25 years of sacrifice, all leading to this moment, a moment that would redefine everything I thought I knew about motherhood and gratitude. The morning of the wedding had started beautifully. I remember the golden light filtering through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, illuminating Olivia's face as I helped her with her veil in the bridal suite. Her dress, an intricate creation of lace and pearls that had consumed 3 months of my salary, cascaded around her like something from a fairy tale. In that moment, looking at my beautiful daughter, I thought every sacrifice had been worth it. "You look perfect," I had whispered, fighting back tears. Olivia had merely nodded, checking her reflection again. "Is Diane here yet?" she asked, referring to her future mother-in-law. I should have seen the signs, the distance in her eyes, the way she brushed my hand away when I tried to adjust her necklace, the one my mother had given me on my own wedding day. But we mothers see what we want to see, don't we? We paint our children in the colors of our hopes rather than the stark shades of reality. The ceremony itself was flawless. James, Olivia's fiancé, looked handsome and confident in his tuxedo, every inch the successful doctor his mother Diane had raised him to be. Diane sat in the front row opposite me, elegant in her designer dress, occasionally dabbing at tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. I sat alone on the bride's side, the empty space beside me a reminder of Robert, my ex-husband, who had chosen a business meeting over his daughter's wedding. He had sent a check instead, which Olivia had accepted with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for any of my contributions. I remember the weight of my dress, navy blue, purchased on sale and altered by my own hands, as I stood watching my daughter say her vows. I remember the pride swelling in my chest as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I've worked for all these years. Little did I know what awaited me at the reception. The grand ballroom of the Overlook sparkled with thousands of tiny lights. Centerpieces of white roses and orchids adorned each table, flowers I had argued against because of their cost, but that Olivia had insisted upon. The wedding planner, Victoria, had pulled me aside earlier that day. "The final payment is due at midnight," she had reminded me discreetly. $30,000 for the reception balance. I had patted my purse, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. "It's all here," I assured her. My entire remaining savings, plus a loan against my modest house on Ocean View Drive. But it was worth it. It had to be worth it. The dinner service was impeccable. Filet mignon and lobster tail, wine selected by a sommelier, a dessert buffet in addition to the 7-tier cake. I barely ate, too nervous about the speech I had prepared, too conscious of the fact that I had calculated the cost of each plate at roughly $250 per person. When the time came for toasts, my brother William went first. Dear William, who had watched me struggle all these years, who had offered to help financially even though he had his own family to support. To my beautiful niece and her handsome husband, he said, raising his glass. And to my sister Margaret, who has shown us all what a mother's love truly means. A few polite claps. Olivia's tight smile. Then James's best man spoke, followed by Emily, the maid of honor. Finally, Olivia herself stood up, resplendent in her gown, and took the microphone. My heart swelled with anticipation. Perhaps now, in front of everyone, she would acknowledge all I had done. Perhaps now I would hear the words I had longed for. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. A sign that she had seen me, truly seen me all these years. She thanked the guests for coming, thanked her bridesmaids for their support, thanked the wedding planner for executing her vision, and then she paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it found me. And most importantly, she said, her voice clear and steady, "I want to thank my real mother." For one breathtaking second, I felt a surge of joy, and then her arm extended, her finger pointed, not at me, but across the room. "Diane," she continued, "you've been more of a mother to me in 3 years than I've had my entire life. You've shown me what it means to be supported, to be understood, to be loved unconditionally." The room fell silent. 200 guests frozen in collective shock. I felt their eyes on me, pitying, curious, embarrassed. The champagne in my glass trembled as my hand began to shake. Beside me, Sophia, my oldest friend, reached for my arm, but I couldn't feel her touch. I couldn't feel anything except a cold wave of realization washing over me. 25 years of sacrifice, dismissed in a single sentence. The white noise in my ears almost drowned out the rest of Olivia's speech. Something about Diane teaching her self-worth, about finally having a mother who put her first. Each word another shard of glass in my heart. I watched as Diane's face registered first surprise, then embarrassment, then a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Her husband had died years ago, and James was her only child. She had welcomed Olivia into her life, into her affluent Bellevue Gardens home with open arms, arms that hadn't been weighed down by report cards and second jobs and constant grinding worry about money. I should have cried. A normal mother would have cried, would have fled the room in tears. But something strange happened inside me as I sat there, impaled by my daughter's words. A lifetime of emotion, love, fear, resentment, exhaustion, crystallized into something harder, something colder, something like clarity. I looked at Olivia, radiant in the dress I could not afford, in the venue I would be paying off for years, surrounded by the luxury I had starved myself to provide. And for the first time, I saw her not as the baby I had cradled or the child I had cherished, but as the woman she had chosen to become. As Olivia finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, I felt my napkin drop from my lap. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet that fell as people noticed me rising. My legs carried me forward toward the head table, toward the microphone my daughter had just relinquished. She saw me coming, and her smile faltered. Perhaps she expected tears. Perhaps she expected me to slink away in shame. She didn't know me at all, I realized. Despite giving her my entire life, she had never really seen me. I felt strangely calm as I reached for the microphone, my mind crystal clear for the first time in years. The weight of the envelope in my purse seemed to pull against my shoulder, reminding me of its presence, of my power, of my choice. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening within me. "You're absolutely right about one thing. Family isn't always about blood." The sacrifices began long before Olivia could even understand what sacrifice meant. I remember the day Robert left us, a rainy Tuesday in April when Olivia was just 7 years old. He packed his designer suitcases into his BMW while she watched from the window, clutching her stuffed rabbit, confused by the finality in his movements. I stood in the kitchen, the divorce papers still warm from the printer, feeling my world collapse around me. "She'll understand when she's older," Robert said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll send money for her education." The money came sporadically at first, then stopped altogether when he started his new family in California. His quarterly phone calls to Olivia grew shorter until they faded into birthday cards, then just Facebook messages. Meanwhile, I was left with a mortgage I couldn't afford and a child who woke up crying for her father. That first year was the hardest. I'd sit at our small kitchen table in our house on Ocean View Drive, a name that promised more than it delivered, as the ocean was visible only if you stood on a chair in the upstairs bathroom, calculating and recalculating our budget. The numbers never changed, never magically increased to meet our needs. My teacher's salary at Westfield Academy barely covered our mortgage and utilities. Something had to give. I started small, no more cable TV, no more dinners out, no more new clothes for me, though I never skimped on Olivia's wardrobe. Children can be cruel, and I didn't want her to face the additional burden of looking different from her classmates. Then came the bigger sacrifices. I took a second job waiting tables at Harbor Lights restaurant on weekends, leaving Olivia with my friend Sophia. I sold my wedding ring to pay for Olivia's dance lessons when she became obsessed with ballet. I rented out our spare bedroom to a quiet graduate student who barely spoke English, but paid his rent on time. "Why does Mr. Chen live with us now?" Olivia asked one night as I tucked her into bed, the sounds of our tenants' muffled phone conversations drifting through the thin walls. "Because he helps us pay for this house," I explained, trying to make it sound like an adventure rather than a necessity. "And because it's nice to help people who are far from home." She seemed to accept this, but I noticed how she began to compare our home to her friends' homes. Homes with 2 parents, with swimming pools, with matching furniture that hadn't been pieced together from yard sales and discount stores. I saw the awareness dawn in her eyes, the gradual understanding that we were different, that we had less. To compensate, I worked harder. I took on summer school classes while other teachers vacationed. I stayed up late grading papers, then woke before dawn to prepare lessons. I donated plasma twice a month at a clinic 30 miles away, telling no one about the bruises in the crooks of my arms or how I sometimes felt faint afterward. The extra $400 a month went directly into Olivia's college fund, a sacred account I never touched, even when our refrigerator died in the middle of a heat wave, or when our 15-year-old car finally gave up the ghost. The strangest part of sacrifice is how it becomes normal. You forget what it's like to buy something simply because you want it. You forget what it feels like to answer yes when a friend invites you on a weekend trip. You forget the luxury of spontaneity, of indulgence, of rest. Everything becomes a calculation. Is this worth the hours I'll need to work to pay for it? Is this worth taking away from Olivia's future? Despite my efforts, I watched Olivia grow increasingly distant as she entered her teenage years. I told myself it was normal adolescent behavior. The eye-rolling, the sighing, the constant comparison of our modest life to her friends' more comfortable existences. What hurt more was how she began to mythologize her absent father, constructing elaborate fantasies about why he couldn't be with us. "Dad says his company needs him in California," she'd announce after their rare phone calls. "He would move back here if he could." I never contradicted these stories. What good would it do to tell her that her father had chosen a new wife, new children, a new life that didn't include room for his firstborn? Instead, I compensated more, worked harder, sacrificed deeper. When Olivia was accepted to Boston University, I remortgaged our house to cover what her scholarships didn't. When she wanted to study abroad in Paris, I took out a personal loan. When she graduated and needed first and last month's rent for an apartment in the city, I drained my emergency fund. Each time, her thank yous grew more perfunctory, her calls more infrequent. I remember sitting alone in our half-empty house the Christmas after she graduated, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I given too much? Not enough? Had my sacrifices somehow communicated not love but something else? Desperation, perhaps, or an unhealthy attachment? I stared at the small pile of presents under our artificial tree, presents I had wrapped for Olivia, who had decided at the last minute to spend the holiday with friends in New York instead. Then came James, handsome, ambitious James Peterson, with his medical degree and his family money and his confident manner. Olivia met him at a hospital fundraiser, she working in marketing for the event, he attending as a newly minted resident physician. Their courtship was swift and, from my limited vantage point, seemed to consist primarily of expensive restaurants and weekend getaways to places I had only seen in magazines. I met his mother Diane 3 months after they started dating. She hosted a dinner at her home in Bellevue Gardens, a neighborhood where the houses had names rather than numbers, where the roads were private and the cars were German. Her house, a sprawling colonial with columns and a circular driveway, made me acutely aware of the paint peeling on my own front porch. Diane was gracious enough, offering me wine from a bottle whose label I couldn't pronounce, and asking polite questions about my teaching career. But I caught the appraising glances, the subtle cataloging of my department store dress and unmanicured hands. Later, I overheard her in the kitchen speaking to James. "She seems nice," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone damning with faint praise. Rather dedicated to her career, isn't she? I didn't hear James's response, but I heard Diane's laugh. Light, practiced, perfect. Well, not everyone is cut out for full-time motherhood. I suppose Olivia turned out well enough, all things considered. All things considered. As if my daughter's success was a surprise given her upbringing. As if the sacrifices I had made, the sleep lost, the opportunities passed up, the dreams deferred, counted for nothing because they hadn't come with a trust fund attached. When Olivia called to tell me they were engaged, 6 months after that dinner, her voice bubbled with excitement. We're thinking June at the Grand Overlook. Diane knows the owners, so they are giving us a special rate. The special rate, as it turned out, was still astronomical. The venue alone would cost $45,000 for the ceremony and reception, adding catering, flowers, music, photography, and Olivia's dream dress. And we were looking at over $80,000, more money than I had ever seen in one place, more than I made in 2 years of teaching. I don't know if I can manage that, honey, I said carefully, sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator and a growing sense of panic. But Mom, she said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone I remembered from her childhood. You've always said you were saving for my wedding. This is what I've always wanted. Diane is helping with the rehearsal dinner, and James's family is paying for the honeymoon. What could I say? That my wedding fund was a fiction I had maintained to hide how little we had. That the money I had managed to save was meant for retirement, for the possibility that I might someday need to stop working. That I had imagined a modest ceremony in the garden of St. Mary's, followed by a reception at the church hall. Instead, I heard myself say, "Of course, sweetheart, if that's what you want." The next day, I visited Coastal Community Bank and spoke with a loan officer about my options. I had some equity in my house. I had my teacher's pension, which I could borrow against. I had a small inheritance from my mother, which I had been saving for emergencies. Put together, it might be enough. "Are you sure about this, Miss Wilson?" the loan officer asked, peering at me over his glasses. "This is a significant financial commitment at your age." At my age. As if 58 was ancient. As if I should be thinking about winding down rather than taking on new debt. But what choice did I have? This was my only daughter, my only child. This was the culmination of every sacrifice I had already made. "I'm sure," I said, signing the papers that would keep me working well into my 70s. The next 10 months were a blur of wedding planning, each decision more expensive than the last. Olivia and Diane formed a partnership, selecting vendors and making choices, occasionally consulting me when it came time to write a check. I watched my savings dwindle, the numbers in my account shrinking with each deposit. "We've found the perfect photographer," Olivia would announce. "He's a bit more than we budgeted, but his work is amazing. The florist says we need more centerpieces than we thought," she'd explain. "But they'll really transform the space." Each time I nodded and adjusted my budget. I stopped contributing to my 401k. I sold my mother's antique silver service. I picked up tutoring jobs on weeknights, falling into bed exhausted only to wake before dawn to grade papers. All for the perfect day, the perfect wedding, the perfect illusion that I could give my daughter what Diane could give her son. A week before the wedding, Olivia asked to meet me at Harbor Lights restaurant, the same place where I had waited tables years ago. She looked radiant, glowing with pre-wedding excitement and the confidence that comes from being young, beautiful, and about to marry into money. "I wanted to thank you," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know this wedding has been expensive." For a moment my heart lifted. Finally recognition, finally appreciation. "But it's important to me," she continued, "that everything is perfect. James's family is used to a certain standard, and I don't want them to think I come from, well, you know." I pulled my hand back slightly. "From what, Olivia?" She had the grace to look embarrassed, at least. "I just mean I don't want them to think we couldn't afford a proper wedding. Diane has been so helpful with everything, showing me how things should be done." The words stung more than they should have. After all, wasn't that what I wanted? For Olivia to move beyond our circumstances, to assimilate into a world of comfort and security. Wasn't that the point of all my sacrifices? But as I sat there, watching my daughter check her designer watch and signal for the check, I wondered if I had somehow taught her the wrong lesson. Instead of gratitude, had I instilled entitlement? Instead of resilience, had I fostered dependence, first on me, now on Diane and James? Had my sacrifices in the end cheapened rather than enriched her character? The night before the wedding, I stood in my bedroom looking at the navy blue dress I would wear the next day. Simple but elegant, the only concession to luxury I had allowed myself. Beside it lay the envelope containing the final payment for the reception, $30,000 due at midnight the following day. My entire remaining savings, plus a loan against my house, everything I had left. It's worth it, I told my reflection in the mirror, trying to convince myself. It's all worth it to see her happy. But as I turned away, a small, quiet voice inside me whispered a question I'd been suppressing for years. What about your happiness, Margaret? What about your life? I silenced that voice, as I always had. Tomorrow was Olivia's day. Everything else could wait. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect June days that seem specially ordered for brides. I woke before my alarm, my body tense with anticipation and anxiety. For a moment I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing my checklist. The dress was steamed. The rings were with William. The final checks were in my purse. Everything was ready. I arrived at St. Mary's Episcopal Church 2 hours early, carrying a garment bag with Olivia's emergency kit, extra makeup, hairpins, double-sided tape, and a small sewing kit. The church was already buzzing with activity. Florists arranged cascades of white roses and lilies along the pews. The organist practiced the wedding march. The wedding planner, Victoria, rushed about with her clipboard and earpiece, orchestrating the chaos with practiced efficiency. "Margaret," she called when she spotted me. "Perfect timing. The makeup artist is already with Olivia in the bridal suite." The bridal suite was actually just the church's nursery, transformed for the day with white drapes and borrowed vanities. When I entered, Olivia sat in front of a mirror while a young woman applied something shimmery to her eyelids. Emily, her maid of honor, was texting on the couch, still in her street clothes. "Mom," Olivia acknowledged without turning. "Can you check if Diane has arrived yet? She has my earrings." I swallowed my disappointment at the tepid greeting. "Of course, honey. You look beautiful already." She did look beautiful, ethereal almost, with her dark hair half pinned up and her skin glowing. For a moment, I saw not the woman she was, but the little girl she had been, gap-toothed and giggling as she tried on my high heels and costume jewelry, playing dress-up for an imaginary wedding. I found Diane in the narthex, surrounded by relatives I barely recognized from the rehearsal dinner. She wore a silver-gray dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my mortgage payments, her blonde hair expertly styled, her makeup flawless. "Margaret," she greeted me with air kisses near both cheeks. "Isn't this exciting? James is a bundle of nerves. Men, right?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Oh, I have Olivia's earrings. The something borrowed. They were my grandmother's." She handed me a small velvet box. Inside nestled a pair of diamond and sapphire earrings that looked museum quality. "They're stunning," I managed, thinking of the pearl necklace I had brought, my mother's, the only real piece of jewelry I owned. I had hoped it would be Olivia's something borrowed, a continuation of a tradition from my own wedding. "I'll take them to her right away." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity. I helped Olivia into her dress, a confection of lace and tulle, with a train that stretched nearly 6 feet behind her. I watched as she put on Diane's earrings, exclaiming over their beauty. I kept my pearl necklace in my pocket, unmentioned. "You need something blue," I said, trying to be useful. "The sapphires in the earrings," she replied, not looking away from her reflection. "And Diane embroidered my initials in blue thread inside the dress. Wasn't that thoughtful?" Another role taken, another tradition usurped. I nodded, forcing a smile. By the time the guests began to arrive, I had been effectively sidelined. Victoria directed me to my seat in the front row, alone, as Robert had texted that morning to say his flight was delayed. He would try to make the reception. I sat ramrod straight in my navy dress, clutching my small purse, watching as the other side of the church filled with James's extended family and friends. The ceremony itself was beautiful, in the way that all weddings are beautiful, full of hope and promise and potential. The organist played Bach, as the wedding party processed in. William escorted me to my seat, then took his place at the altar as one of James's groomsmen, a last-minute addition after one of James's cousins caught the flu. Then the music changed, and everyone stood. Olivia appeared at the back of the church on the arm of my brother William, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle in Robert's absence. She was radiant, her face visible through the delicate veil, her smile wide and genuine as her eyes locked on James waiting at the altar. In that moment, watching my daughter float down the aisle toward her future, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pride, certainly, joy at her happiness, but also a strange sense of loss, as if I were witnessing not just a wedding, but a kind of ending, the formal, final transfer of Olivia from my world to another. The minister spoke of love and commitment, of two becoming one, of families joining together. Olivia and James exchanged vows they had written themselves, his eloquent and moving, hers witty and warm. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. I clapped until my hands hurt, blinking back tears. The receiving line outside the church stretched for nearly an hour. I stood at the end, after the newly married couple, after James's parents. Many guests had run out of pleasantries by the time they reached me. Some didn't bother to stop at all, moving directly from congratulating the Petersons to the waiting fleet of luxury cars that would transport everyone to the Grand Overlook Hotel. The drive to the reception gave me a rare moment of solitude. As my old Toyota followed the procession of BMWs and Mercedes, I rehearsed what I would say in my mother of the bride's speech. I had written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to find the perfect balance of sentiment and wisdom, trying to express 28 years of love in 3 minutes of carefully chosen words. The Grand Overlook perched on a cliff above the Atlantic, its white columns and expansive windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Valets in red jackets opened car doors and whisked away keys. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a wonderland of white flowers, crystal, and candlelight. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Not bad, huh?" William said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed me one. "You've done good, Mags." I sipped the champagne, which tasted like liquid sunshine. "I didn't do any of this," I admitted quietly. "Olivia and Diane planned everything. I just wrote the checks." William's face softened with sympathy. "Hey, that's not nothing. You made this possible. At what cost?" I hadn't meant to say it aloud, but there it was, the question that had been haunting me for months. Before William could respond, Victoria was ushering everyone to their seats for dinner. I found my place at the head table, between an empty chair for Robert and Diane's husband's cousin, a taciturn man who smelled faintly of cigars. Across from me, Diane held court, describing in detail how she had found the perfect baker for the cake after interviewing 7 candidates. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. I ate little, my stomach knotted with nerves about my upcoming speech. Around me, conversation flowed and ebbed. I caught snippets about summer homes being opened, about charity galas being planned, about European vacations on the horizon, conversations from another world, a world my daughter was now entering, a world where my sacrifices were not currency but curiosity, if they registered at all. As the dessert plates were cleared away, Victoria nodded to the DJ, who tapped his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. and Mrs. James Peterson for their first dance." Olivia and James moved to the center of the dance floor as the opening notes of "At Last" filled the room. They swayed together, lost in each other's eyes, the picture of young love and limitless potential. When the song ended, James danced with Diane while Olivia stood awkwardly with William, who had volunteered for the father-daughter dance in Robert's absence. Then it was time for speeches. The best man went first, telling raucous stories about James's medical school days that skirted the edge of appropriateness. Emily followed with a teary tribute to her friendship with Olivia. William spoke briefly, raising his glass to new beginnings and family bonds. I clutched my note cards, waiting for my turn. But instead of Victoria calling my name, she introduced James's father, who spoke for 10 minutes about the Peterson family legacy and his pride in his only son. When he finished, Victoria nodded to Olivia, who stood and took the microphone. My speech would come after hers, I realized. That made sense. Save the mother of the bride for the emotional finale. I mentally reviewed my opening lines as Olivia began to speak. Thank you all so much for coming today, she said, her voice clear and confident. James and I are so grateful for your love and support. She thanked the wedding party, the officiants, the venue staff. She made a joke about the cake that had everyone laughing. She spoke about meeting James, about falling in love, about their plans for the future. Before we move on to the dancing portion of the evening, she continued, there's one more person I need to thank. Someone who has shown me what it truly means to be supported and loved. My heart swelled. After all the oversights and disappointments of the day, here it was, the moment of recognition. I smoothed my dress, ready to stand when she called my name. I want to thank my real mother, Olivia said, her voice ringing through the ballroom. For one shining second, I felt vindicated. Then she turned, her arm extending not toward me but across the room. Diane, she continued, you've been more of a mother to me in 3 years than I've had my entire life. You've shown me what it means to be supported, to be understood, to be loved unconditionally. The room went silent. 200 pairs of eyes swiveled between Olivia, Diane, and me. I sat frozen, the blood draining from my face, my hands suddenly cold around my champagne glass. Beside me, I heard William's sharp intake of breath. Across the table, Diane's expression cycled rapidly from surprise to embarrassment to a sort of uncomfortable pride. When I was planning this wedding, Olivia continued, seemingly oblivious to the shockwaves she was sending through the room, Diane was there every step of the way. She helped me find my style, my voice. She showed me I deserved the best. Each word was a dagger. 28 years of midnight fevers and school projects, of working multiple jobs and stretching every dollar, of putting Olivia first in every decision I made. All dismissed, all forgotten, all replaced by 3 years of Diane's effortless mentorship. So thank you, Diane, Olivia concluded, raising her glass, for being the mother I always needed. I love you. The applause that followed was scattered, uncertain. People didn't know where to look. Some stared fixedly at their plates. Others whispered behind their hands. Sophia, sitting at a nearby table, looked at me with horror and pity. I should have cried. I should have fled the room in tears. That's what everyone expected. The pathetic single mother, heartbroken and humiliated, running away to lick her wounds in private. That's what Olivia expected too. I could see it in the way she glanced at me after her speech, a mixture of defiance and preparation, as if bracing for my emotional collapse. But something strange happened as I sat there, impaled by my daughter's words. All the emotions I had carried for so long, the anxiety about money, the fear of not doing enough, the desperate hope that my sacrifices would be worth it, crystallized into something new, something hard and clear and surprisingly powerful. I looked at my daughter, radiant in her designer gown, basking in the glow of her new family's wealth and status. I looked at Diane, uncomfortable but flattered, the perfect accessory mother for Olivia's carefully curated new life. And I saw with sudden clarity what I had been blind to for years, that my devotion had not been met with gratitude, but with entitlement, that my sacrifices had been not investments, but surrenders. As Olivia returned to her seat, Victoria looked frantically at her clipboard, clearly unsure whether to proceed with my planned speech. Before she could decide, I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. All eyes turned to me. I walked steadily to the microphone, my back straight, my eyes dry. Olivia watched me approach, uncertainty flickering across her perfect features. She had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps a scene. She didn't know me at all, I realized. Despite giving her my entire life, she had never really seen me. As I reached for the microphone, I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse, $30,000, the final payment for this elaborate charade. But I also felt something else, the weight lifting from my shoulders, the burden of unappreciated sacrifice. Finally, mercifully falling away. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You're absolutely right about one thing. Family isn't always about blood." The ballroom held its collective breath as I stood at the microphone, 200 guests suspended in that moment between anticipation and dread. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some morbidly curious, all waiting for the emotional collapse of the rejected mother. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, trays half raised, to watch the unfolding drama. But something crystallized inside me in that moment, a lifetime of emotions hardening into a diamond-like clarity. Standing there, I wasn't just Margaret Wilson, the abandoned wife and apparently inadequate mother. I was all the versions of myself I had sacrificed over the years. The young woman who once dreamed of getting a PhD in literature, the teacher who declined department chair positions because they would take time away from Olivia, the friend who stopped accepting invitations, the woman who never remarried because raising her daughter consumed all her energy and love. "Family isn't always about blood," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. "Sometimes it's about choices, the choices we make every day about who and what we value." I looked directly at Olivia, whose triumphant smile had faded into uncertainty. "For 28 years I chose you, Olivia, every single day. I chose you when I worked 2 jobs so you could take ballet lessons. I chose you when I sold my mother's silver to pay for your senior trip to France. I chose you when I drained my retirement account to cover your college expenses when your father's promised support never materialized." My voice remained steady, not rising in anger or breaking in sorrow. This wasn't an accusation, it was simply a statement of facts, long overdue. I chose you when I gave up pursuing my own master's degree because tuition money could only stretch so far, and your education seemed more important than mine. I chose you when I drove an old car with no air conditioning so you could have the latest clothes and technology. I chose you when I donated plasma twice a month to build your college fund, something I never told you because I didn't want you to feel burdened by my sacrifices. The room was utterly silent now. Even the clink of glasses and the rustle of clothing had stopped. From the corner of my eye, I could see James shift uncomfortably in his seat. Diane stared at her plate. William watched me with a mixture of pride and concern. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I continued, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. "I made these choices willingly, out of love. But choices have consequences, both for those who make them and those who benefit from them." I reached into my purse and removed the envelope, heavy with the cashier's check for $30,000, the final payment for this elaborate wedding that had just become a stage for my public humiliation. "This wedding," I said, holding up the envelope, "cost $80,000. That's 3 years of my teacher's salary. That's the remainder of my retirement fund, plus a second mortgage on my house. That's thousands of hours of extra work, of sacrificed sleep, of deferred dreams. Not because I had the money to spare. I don't have a summer home or a trust fund or family connections. I have my work, my small house, and the belief that investing in my daughter's happiness was worth any price." I looked around the room, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the elaborate floral arrangements, the fine china and silver, the champagne that cost more per bottle than I usually spent on a week's groceries. "I wanted you to have this day, Olivia, because I thought it would make you happy. I thought it would make you feel loved. I never expected gratitude. Love doesn't keep a balance sheet, but I did expect respect." I turned slightly to face Diane, who had the grace to look profoundly uncomfortable. "Diane, you are fortunate to have built such a loving relationship with my daughter. Truly, I'm glad Olivia has you in her life. But being a mother isn't just about shopping trips and wedding planning and showing someone the finer things. Being a mother is about the hard choices, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the willingness to put someone else's needs above your own, year after year, even when it's difficult, even when it's thankless." I returned my gaze to Olivia, who was now blinking rapidly, her cheeks flushed with what might have been anger or shame or perhaps finally understanding. "You said Diane showed you what it means to be supported, to be understood, to be loved unconditionally," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the fire in my heart. I wonder if you've ever asked yourself who supported you through chicken pox and broken hearts and college applications, who tried to understand your dreams and fears from the moment you could express them, who loved you unconditionally through temper tantrums and teenage rebellion, and the thousand small rejections that children inflict on their parents as they grow. I paused, remembering all those moments. Olivia at 3, sobbing in my arms after a nightmare. At 10, proudly showing me an A on her science project. At 16, slamming her bedroom door and declaring she hated me for enforcing a curfew. At 22, calling in tears when her first serious boyfriend broke up with her. What you really mean, I continued, is that Diane showed you what it's like to be parented with abundant resources, without the strain of financial hardship, and that's a valid appreciation. Money makes many aspects of life, including parenting, easier, but it doesn't make love deeper or choices more meaningful. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me, a letting go, a release. There's something I never told you, Olivia, something I plan to share during my Mother of the Bride speech, which seems to have been overlooked in tonight's program. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria, the wedding planner, looked stricken, suddenly realizing her oversight. I was adopted as an infant, I said, my voice clear and carrying to every corner of the ballroom. I never knew my birth mother. The woman I called Mom had no biological connection to me, but she chose me. She worked hard to give me a good life, much as I've worked to give you one. When she died, she left me a small inheritance, money I've been saving for something special. I held up the envelope again. This final payment for your wedding, $30,000, represents the last of that inheritance, plus a loan against my house. I intended it as a symbol of continuity, of the love that flows from one generation to the next, regardless of blood ties. I saw confusion in Olivia's eyes, then the dawning realization of what I was about to do. But you're right that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about recognizing who truly acts as family toward you. With deliberate movements, I tore the envelope in half, then in quarters. The sound of ripping paper seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. I let the pieces fall onto the table in front of me. Since Diane is your real mother, I'm sure she'll be happy to cover this final payment. After all, that's what real mothers do. They provide for their children's needs, whatever the cost to themselves. Gasps echoed around the room. Diane's face went pale. James half rose from his chair, then sank back down when his father put a restraining hand on his arm. The remaining money from my mother's inheritance, the money I didn't spend on this wedding, will be donated tomorrow to the New Hope Adoption Center, the same agency that placed me with my adoptive parents. The donation will be made in your name, Olivia, as a reminder that motherhood is about choices, not circumstances. I stepped back from the microphone, suddenly aware of my racing heart, of the slight tremor in my hands. But my voice had never wavered. My eyes had remained dry. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. As I turned to walk back to my seat, William stood up and began to applaud, slowly at first, then with increasing conviction. Sophia joined him, then Emily, looking confused but supportive. Soon half the room was applauding, not for my humiliation of Olivia, which had not been my intent, but perhaps for the dignity with which I had reclaimed my own worth. I didn't return to the head table. Instead, I walked directly to Victoria, who stood wide-eyed near the kitchen doors. I believe the final payment is due at midnight, I said quietly. You should speak with Diane about arrangements. My financial obligation to this event has concluded. Victoria nodded mutely, her professional composure momentarily shattered by the unexpected turn of events. I collected my wrap and purse from the coat check and walked out of the grand ballroom, through the hotel's marble lobby, and into the cool evening air. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of conversation rising to a crescendo as guests processed what they had witnessed. I could imagine the frantic discussions now taking place at the head table, the hurried consultations with the hotel manager about the unpaid balance. But that was no longer my concern. For the first time in 28 years, I had put myself first, not out of spite or revenge, but out of a long overdue recognition of my own value. The valet looked surprised when I handed him my ticket. My aging Toyota seemed out of place among the luxury vehicles lining the circular drive. As he went to retrieve it, I stood alone under the portico, breathing in the salt air from the nearby ocean. "Margaret!" I turned to see William hurrying toward me, his bow tie undone, his face flushed. "Are you okay?" he asked, searching my face. That was something in there." "I'm fine," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Better than fine, actually. "You're leaving? The reception isn't over." "It is for me." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I've said what I needed to say. William glanced back at the hotel. "It's chaos in there. Diane is on the phone with her bank. James's father is arguing with the hotel manager. Olivia is..." He trailed off, clearly trying to spare my feelings. "Olivia is upset," I finished for him. "I understand. She has every right to her feelings, just as I have a right to mine. Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. "Or you could stay at our place tonight." I shook my head. "Thank you, but no. I need some time alone, to think, to plan." "Plan what?" The valet pulled up with my car, looking slightly apologetic about its faded paint and dented fender. "The rest of my life," I said, tipping the valet with one of the few $20 bills left in my wallet. "I've spent 28 years focused on Olivia's future. Now it's time to consider my own." William hugged me fiercely. "I'm proud of you, Mags. Mom would be proud too." As I drove away from the grand overlook, I glanced in the rear-view mirror at the illuminated hotel perched on the cliff, its windows glowing like a fairy tale castle. Inside those walls, a drama was unfolding, one that would undoubtedly become family legend, retold and reinterpreted for years to come. But I was no longer part of that story. I was beginning a new one. The night air rushing through my open window felt like possibility. The weight of unpaid bills and looming mortgage payments still pressed on me. Tearing up that check had been both liberating and financially reckless. But I would manage, as I always had. The difference was that now I would be managing for myself, not for Olivia. I drove directly to Ocean View Drive, to the modest house that had been both haven and prison for so many years. Inside, I kicked off my uncomfortable heels and made a cup of tea. Then I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I had calculated budgets and graded papers, and watched Olivia grow from a toddler to a young woman, and began to write. Not a letter of apology or explanation to Olivia, though perhaps that would come later. Not a bitter enumeration of grievances or sacrifices, though I had every right to feel both bitter and aggrieved. Instead, I wrote a list. Margaret's next chapter: graduate degree in literature, travel to England to visit the homes of the Bronte sisters, learn to paint, sell the house, and find a smaller place, maybe near the community college, apply for that curriculum development position I've always wanted, call Sophia about that book club she's been trying to get me to join. Small dreams, perhaps, compared to luxury weddings and society connections. Modest aspirations after decades of putting someone else's needs and wants above my own. But they were my dreams, my aspirations, and for the first time in 28 years, they were my priority. I was still writing when my doorbell rang shortly after midnight. Through the peephole, I was surprised to see not Olivia or William, but Diane Peterson, still in her silver gray dress, though her carefully styled hair had begun to come undone. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but that would be the old Margaret, conflict avoidant, self-effacing, always accommodating others at her own expense. The new Margaret, born this very evening in a moment of startling clarity, opened the door. "Diane," I said, neither welcoming nor hostile. "This is unexpected." She looked different away from the glittering backdrop of the hotel. Older, less assured, profoundly uncomfortable. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual polished confidence. I stepped aside, allowing her into my home, my small, modest, slightly shabby home that suddenly felt like a statement rather than an apology. Diane entered tentatively, clutching a large white album to her chest like a shield. "I found this," she said, holding it out to me, "among the wedding gifts. It's addressed to Olivia, but I thought you should have it." I recognized it immediately, the baby book I had painstakingly assembled during Olivia's first years, recording every milestone, pasting in photos and locks of hair, preserving the small moments that constitute a life. I had wrapped it and placed it with the other gifts, intending it as a reminder of all the history that had led to this day. "Thank you," I said, taking it from her, but it was meant for Olivia. Diane looked around my living room, taking in the worn furniture, the bookshelves crammed with paperbacks, the faded photographs on the walls, a life lived modestly but fully. "What you did tonight?" she said, finally meeting my eyes. "With the check, the hotel manager is concerned." "I imagine he is." "James's father covered the balance," she said. "He wasn't happy about it, but he did it." I nodded, unsurprised. The wealthy always found ways to maintain appearances. "I didn't know," Diane continued, her voice softer now, "about all you've done for Olivia, about the second job, the plasma donations. She never told me." "Why would she? Children rarely see their parents' sacrifices clearly. It's not their job to." "Still," Diane insisted, "what she said was cruel, thoughtless. I never encouraged her to think of me as replacing you. You have to believe that." I studied her face, the expensive skincare, the subtle cosmetic work, the carefully maintained appearance of a woman who had never had to choose between her own needs and someone else's. "I believe you," I said finally. "Olivia made her own choices tonight, just as I made mine." Diane nodded, looking relieved. "What will you do now?" I glanced at my list on the kitchen table, visible through the doorway. "My next chapter. Live," I said simply. "For myself, for once." Diane left shortly after midnight, taking with her the weight of unspoken tensions and leaving behind a strange, unexpected connection. As I closed the door behind her, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a curious sense of peace. The storm had broken, and in its wake came clarity. I slept deeply that night, without the usual 3 a.m. anxiety that had been my companion for decades. When I awoke, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. For a moment, I lay still, waiting for the familiar knot of worry to form in my stomach. Bills to pay, papers to grade, Olivia's needs to anticipate. But instead I felt oddly weightless, as if the previous night's confrontation had severed some invisible tether. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. William checking if I was okay, Sophia offering support, Victoria the wedding planner frantically trying to understand what had happened with the final payment, and Olivia. 3 calls, no voicemails, 1 text that simply read, "How could you?" I set the phone aside without responding. Those conversations would happen, but not today. Today belonged to me. After a leisurely cup of coffee, a small luxury I rarely allowed myself, I drove to the New Hope Adoption Center, a modest brick building tucked between a dentist's office and a bakery in downtown Newport. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile as I entered. "May I help you?" "My name is Margaret Wilson," I said, my voice steady. "I was placed through New Hope in 1965, and I'd like to make a donation." 2 hours later, I emerged with a lighter bank account, but a fuller heart. The donation, $25,000, nearly everything I had left after the wedding expenses, would fund a scholarship program for adopted children. The Margaret Wilson Educational Fund would help cover college application fees, test prep courses, and textbooks, small expenses that often created insurmountable barriers for children without family resources. "This is extraordinarily generous," the director had said, clearly stunned by the check I'd written. "May I ask what prompted this gift?" I'd told her a simplified version of my story. Adopted as an infant, raised by loving parents who had instilled in me the value of education, now wanting to give back. I didn't mention Olivia's rejection or the torn-up wedding check. This wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about honoring the choices that had shaped my life. As I walked to my car, my phone rang again. Olivia. This time I answered. "Mom." Her voice was small, choked with what might have been tears or anger or both. "Hello, Olivia. How could you do that to me? On my wedding day? In front of everyone?" I leaned against my car, feeling the warm metal through the thin fabric of my dress. A young couple walked by, pushing a stroller, their faces alight with the exhausted joy of new parenthood. I remembered that feeling, the overwhelming love, the fierce protectiveness. The absolute certainty that I would do anything, sacrifice anything for my child. I could ask you the same question, I said quietly. It's not the same thing at all. Her voice rose. I just thanked Diane for being supportive. You humiliated me in front of all our guests. You ruined my reception. I stated facts, Olivia. Facts about choices and consequences. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call you names. I simply spoke my truths after years of silence. By tearing up the check for the venue, do you know what happened after you left? The hotel manager threatened to end the reception. James's father had to write a personal check. Everyone was whispering about us. I'm sorry for the disruption, I said, and meant it. But I'm not sorry for finally standing up for myself. You declared Diane your real mother in front of 200 people, knowing I had sacrificed everything to give you that wedding. What did you expect me to do? The line went quiet for a moment. When Olivia spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming the wheedling tone she had used since childhood when she wanted something. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to thank Diane for her help with the wedding. You know how it is. You say things for effect. It came out wrong. For so many years, this was the point where I would have relented, where I would have accepted the half apology, smoothed over the hurt, put her feelings above my own. The old Margaret would have said, I understand, sweetheart. Let's just forget about it. But I wasn't that Margaret anymore. No, Olivia, it didn't come out wrong. It came out exactly as you intended. You wanted to align yourself publicly with Diane and her world, the wealth, the status, the effortless privilege. You wanted to distance yourself from me and everything I represent, the struggle, the sacrifice, the constant awareness of limits. You made a choice, just as I made a choice in response. So what now? She asked, a brittle edge to her voice. You're just done being my mother because I hurt your feelings? I watched a seagull land on a nearby lamppost, its wings catching the sunlight. I will always be your mother, Olivia. Nothing changes that, but our relationship needs to change. I can't keep pouring everything I have, financially, emotionally, practically, into a one-sided relationship. I need to create a life that's about more than just serving your needs. What's that supposed to mean? The defensiveness in her voice suggested she already knew. It means I won't be your financial safety net anymore. It means I expect to be treated with respect, not as an embarrassing footnote in your new life. It means I'm going to pursue my own dreams now, just as you're pursuing yours. The silence that followed told me everything about the true nature of our relationship, how it had become transactional rather than emotional, how my value to Olivia had been measured in what I could provide, rather than who I was. I'm hanging up now, I said gently. We can talk again when you're ready to have an honest conversation about where we go from here. I love you, Olivia. I always will. But I love myself too, something I forgot for far too long. I ended the call before she could respond, before I could weaken and apologize for standing firm. Then I drove to Westfield Academy and asked to see the principal. Margaret! Howard Chen looked up from his desk with surprise. I didn't expect to see you until fall term. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said, taking a seat across from him. Remember that curriculum development position you mentioned last year? The one that would require going back for a master's degree. Is it still available? His eyebrows rose. Potentially. The grant funding came through, but we haven't started the formal search yet. Are you interested? I thought you said the timing wasn't right for you. The timing has suddenly improved, I replied with a smile. Very suddenly. 3 days later, William helped me clear out my spare bedroom, which had been serving as storage for Olivia's childhood possessions, boxes of trophies and school projects I had dutifully preserved. We packed most of it into his SUV to deliver to Olivia's new apartment. Are you sure about this? He asked, hefting a box of high school yearbooks. You don't have to purge everything right away. You're allowed to take your time. I'm not purging, I explained, sorting through a stack of framed photographs. I'm making space for a home office, for my graduate studies. Olivia's memories belong with her now, not cluttering up my house. I kept a few treasures, the clay handprint from kindergarten, the Mother's Day cards made with construction paper and too much glue, the photograph of us at the beach when she was 7, both of us laughing as waves crashed around our knees. These weren't just Olivia's history, they were mine too. Evidence of a love that had been real and profound, whatever had happened since. William paused in the doorway, studying me with the particular scrutiny that siblings can bring to bear. "You seem different," he said finally. "Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," I admitted, "like I've set down something I've been carrying for too long." He nodded slowly. "You know she'll come around eventually, once the honeymoon glow wears off and real life sets in. Once she has her own kids and understands what you did for her." "Maybe," I said, not entirely convinced. "But I can't plan my life around waiting for that realization. I've already waited too long to live for myself." A week after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. James stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable in designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mrs. Wilson," he began formally, "may I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered my living room with the careful movements of someone in unfamiliar territory. "Olivia doesn't know I'm here," he said, remaining standing even after I gestured toward the couch. "She'd be upset if she knew." "Then why are you here, James?" He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, suddenly looking younger than his 30 years, more like the uncertain medical student he had been not so long ago. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally. "Not for Olivia, she needs to do that herself, but for my part in what happened. I should have spoken up when she said those things about you. I should have acknowledged all you've done for her." His words surprised me. In the whirlwind of wedding planning, I had barely gotten to know James beyond superficial interactions. I had categorized him, perhaps unfairly, as just another privileged young man, blind to his own advantages. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed, finally sinking onto the edge of the couch. "Cowardice, mainly. It's easier to go along with things, to keep the peace. And I didn't know, not really, about all the sacrifices you'd made. Olivia never talked about that part of her childhood." "Of course she didn't," I said without bitterness. "We don't like to acknowledge our dependencies, our vulnerabilities, especially when we're trying to reinvent ourselves." James nodded slowly. "My mother died when I was 12, he said, the non sequitur catching me off guard. "My father remarried when I was in high school. Diane is technically my stepmother, though she adopted me legally when I was 17. This revelation shifted my understanding of the dynamics at play. Suddenly, Diane's embrace of Olivia made more sense. She had practice at becoming a mother to someone else's almost grown child, at stepping into a role that required more friend than authority figure. "I didn't know," I said. "No one mentioned it at the wedding," he acknowledged. "It didn't fit the perfect family narrative. Just like Olivia's version of her childhood doesn't include the financial struggles or your sacrifices." We talked for nearly an hour about his medical residency, about my plans for graduate school, about the complex ways families form and reform. As he was leaving, he turned at the door. "She does love you," he said, "underneath all the status anxiety and image management, and she'll realize what she's done, eventually." "I hope so," I replied, "but my life can't wait for that realization." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "For what it's worth, I think what you did was brave, necessary." After he left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the summer twilight settle over my modest neighborhood. Somewhere across town, Olivia and James were probably in their luxury apartment, perhaps still unpacking wedding gifts or planning their delayed honeymoon. Diane was in her mansion in Bellevue Gardens, possibly thinking about the strange encounter in my living room 3 nights ago. Robert, who had missed the wedding entirely, was in California with his new family, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in his absence. And I was here, on the porch of the house where I had raised my daughter, surrounded by the physical reminders of a life devoted to someone else's dreams. But inside, on my kitchen table, lay the acceptance letter from Brown University's master's program in English literature, a course catalog circled with the classes I would take in the fall, and brochures for small apartments closer to campus. The pain of Olivia's rejection hadn't disappeared. I suspected it never would fully heal. That kind of wound leaves a scar. But alongside it had grown something new, a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing, of a future defined by my own choices rather than someone else's needs. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the moment when Olivia had most decisively rejected me as her mother, I had finally given myself permission to be more than just a mother. In trying to diminish me, she had inadvertently set me free. 3 months later, I sold the house on Ocean View Drive. The real estate market in Newport was strong, and the modest home I had struggled to maintain for decades turned out to be worth considerably more than I had imagined. After paying off the mortgage and the remaining wedding debts, I had enough for a small condominium near campus and a cushion for my graduate studies. On moving day, as the last boxes were being loaded into the truck, I received a text from Olivia. "Heard you're selling the house. Were you planning to tell me?" I looked around at the empty rooms where she had taken her first steps, lost her first tooth, celebrated birthdays and holidays, stormed out in teenage rage, and returned in young adult uncertainty. This house had been her constant, her foundation. Selling it probably felt like another rejection, another statement that I was moving on without her. I typed back, "Yes, starting fresh. My new address is below when you're ready to visit. There will always be a place for you in my home, Olivia, just as there will always be a place for you in my heart." She didn't respond that day or the next. But a week after I moved into my new condominium, a package arrived. A houseplant in a ceramic pot painted with sunflowers, and a card that simply read, "New beginnings." Oh, it wasn't an apology, it wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a start, a small acknowledgement that while our relationship had fundamentally changed, it wasn't beyond repair. Like the plant, it would need care and attention to grow, but the potential was there. As for me, I hung my course schedule on the refrigerator, joined a book club with Sophia, and applied for a passport, my first step toward that long-dreamed-of trip to the Bronte sisters' home in England. At 58, I was finally the protagonist of my own story, not just a supporting character in someone else's. The $80,000 wedding had cost me far more than money, but what I gained in its aftermath, self-respect, direction, freedom, was worth every penny. Looking back now, 3 years after that fateful wedding day, I sometimes wonder if Olivia's cruel words were actually the greatest gift she could have given me. I want to thank my real mother. 5 words that shattered my heart, but ultimately freed my soul. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I just shared with you how I spent $80,000 on my daughter's wedding, only to be publicly disowned in front of 200 guests. But more importantly, I shared how that moment of humiliation became the catalyst for reclaiming my own life after decades of self-sacrifice. For 28 years, I had been defined solely as Olivia's mother. I worked 2 jobs, donated plasma, gave up my own education, and drained every financial resource I had to give her advantages I never had. I drove an old car, lived in a modest house, and postponed my own dreams, all to support hers. I did it willingly, out of love, never expecting gratitude, but at least hoping for basic respect. Instead, at the pinnacle moment of maternal sacrifice, the lavish wedding I could not afford but financed anyway, my daughter publicly rejected me in favor of her wealthy mother-in-law. "I want to thank my real mother," she said, pointing at Diane, dismissing 28 years of my love and sacrifice in a single gesture. In that moment, something crystallized within me. Instead of crumbling as everyone expected, I found my voice. I tore up the final payment check for $30,000, revealed my own adoption story that Olivia never knew, and announced that the remainder of my savings would go to the adoption agency that had placed me as an infant. I walked out with my dignity intact, leaving chaos in my wake as the hotel demanded payment and Olivia's perfect day unraveled. That night marked the beginning of my transformation. After a lifetime of putting someone else first, I finally put myself at the center of my own story. I created the Margaret Wilson Educational Fund at New Hope Adoption Center. I sold the house where I had raised Olivia and bought a small condominium near Brown University, where I enrolled in the master's program in English literature I had deferred for decades. I started traveling, joined a book club, and began building a life that was about my passions rather than someone else's needs. The aftermath wasn't simple or painless. Olivia's initial anger gradually gave way to confusion, then tentative reconciliation attempts. Her husband James visited to apologize for his silent complicity. Diane, the real mother, came to return Olivia's baby book and stayed for a conversation that revealed more complexity in our situation than I had recognized. My relationship with my daughter is forever changed, more distant, but perhaps more honest, still healing but no longer defined by her dependence or my sacrifice. The greatest irony is that Olivia now understands me better as I pursue my own path than she did when my entire existence revolved around supporting hers. When she announced her pregnancy a year after the wedding, our conversation was different than it might have been before. She called not just to share the news, but to ask questions about motherhood that revealed a new awareness of what I had done for her. "Were you scared?" she asked. "When you found out you were having me?" "Terrified," I admitted, "but also full of love. Both can exist at once." "I don't know if I can do it," she confessed. "Be a good mother. You'll find your way," I told her. "Just remember that being a good mother doesn't mean erasing yourself. It took me too long to learn that lesson. When my granddaughter Ellie was born, I held her with a different kind of joy than I had felt holding Olivia. Love without the weight of sole responsibility. Connection without complete self-sacrifice. Diane and I have developed an unexpected friendship, united by our love for this child and our different but complementary perspectives on family and motherhood. The $80,000 I spent on that wedding, money I didn't have that I'll be paying off for years, might seem like a foolish investment given what happened, but I've come to see it differently. That expense bought not just a single day of celebration that turned sour, but my awakening to a fundamental truth, that my value isn't measured by what I give to others, but by what I allow myself to receive, to become, to be. I'm 61 now, with a master's degree, a position developing literature curriculum for underprivileged schools, and a passport full of stamps. I have a small circle of devoted friends, a growing relationship with my granddaughter, and a carefully negotiated peace with my daughter. I have boundaries I never had before, and dreams I'm actively pursuing rather than perpetually deferring. This isn't the life I imagined when I was younger. It's better in some ways, harder in others. But most importantly, it's mine. Chosen deliberately, lived authentically, valued properly. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you've given everything to someone who takes you for granted, if you've deferred your own dreams for so long, you've almost forgotten what they were. If you're measuring your worth solely by what you sacrifice for others, please hear me. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Never too late to tear up the check, walk out the door, and start a new chapter. I want to thank each of you for listening to my story on Revenge Expected. Creating these videos takes considerable time and effort, from finding people willing to share their most vulnerable moments to the hours spent recording and editing. Your support means everything to this channel. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button right now. Don't just think about it. Actually click it. This channel survives on your engagement. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have torn up that check? Would you have walked out? Or would you have handled it differently? I read every comment, and your perspectives helped me process my own experience. Was I too harsh with Olivia? Not harsh enough? Did my revenge go too far? Or not far enough? I genuinely want to know what you think. The like button is right there. Hitting it takes 1 second, but makes a huge difference in helping others discover this channel. And if you found value in my story, if it gave you perspective or courage or just a moment of connection, please consider supporting Revenge Expected with super thanks. Your financial contribution helps cover the costs of producing daily videos like this one and allows the channel to continue bringing you powerful, real-life stories of people who finally stood up for themselves. Every super thanks donation, no matter how small, directly supports the creation of more content. Think of it as buying the channel a coffee to say keep going. It truly makes a difference in maintaining this platform where people like me can share our stories and perhaps help others facing similar situations. Check out the other videos on this channel too. Stories of people finding their voice, setting boundaries, and reclaiming their power in ways both big and small. From workplace redemption to family confrontations, Revenge Expected chronicles those pivotal moments when someone finally says, enough, and changes the course of their life. Remember, sometimes the most unexpected revenge isn't what you do to others, but what you finally do for yourself. Thank you for being part of my journey. I'm Margaret Wilson, And this has been my story of how an $80,000 wedding bought me something priceless: my freedom.